So last night I just finished the Final Fantasy VII Remake, or I guess part 1 of this series that they're doing, and I have some thoughts. Before I get into what I think of the game, I think it's important to know that I'm relatively new to Final Fantasy and its games. I had always been interested in delving into the franchise, and Final Fantasy VII was the only game I had any experience with. But a couple of years ago, I decided I was going to play through all of the mainline Final Fantasy games. And so far, I have played and beaten 1 through 7. 7 was the only one I was familiar with because I had a friend in middle school who was a huge Final Fantasy fan, and he had me play through a bit of 7. And by a bit of 7, I mean I played through the first disc and I got to the beginning of the second disc, but I never picked it back up. That is until a couple of months ago where I played through the original on my Switch. And I've gotta say, 7 is probably my favorite so far when playing through all the Final Fantasies in a row. So I was pretty hyped for this remake after I played through the original. But after beating it, I'm very concerned about where the future installments are going to go. So before I get into that, I'm going to talk about what I like about the game before I get into the negatives. I won't go into any spoilers until the end of the video. So first of all, story and characters. I really like what they did with the character development in the game. The characters feel a lot more fleshed out, and there's some dialogue exchanges that are really great. It's the kind of character expansion that people want in this game. And for certain chapters, it's expanded in a way to where it's even more ridiculous than it was in the original, and it's pretty great, especially Chapter 9. As far as gameplay goes, it is not turn-based combat, but a sort of hybrid between action and turn-based. It's very strange, but I do like it. You can attack, dodge, and block, but also perform special abilities by opening the menu. And that will slow down the battle as it's happening. So you can think on your feet, but you can also have a bit of time to strategize. You can also set shortcuts for each character to make battles flow a bit smoother. So the gameplay in that aspect, I do really like. For the presentation, this game looks really good. Most of the time. But the music in the game is by far the best part of the game. There's so many great arrangements of classic songs, and a lot of it is dynamic, so it changes throughout the game and throughout battles. It's really good. Now I'm going to go over the negatives of the game, and I'll start with presentation, then gameplay, and then story and characters, because that's where I have my biggest gripes. So let's start with presentation. There are some areas that look a lot rougher than others, specifically on doors and stuff, where the textures don't look nearly as good as the character models. And there are even some characters where the textures on their clothes are just popping in. I think a lot of that is due to the limitations of the hardware it's on. This is a very late release PS4 game, but I think when it comes out on PC next year, it'll probably look a lot better. And when you'll be able to play it on the PS5, there'll probably be a patch to where it'll actually look a lot better. Hopefully, that is. So, we'll see. There's also a bit of a problem with the mixing of the music and the dialogue sometimes, so you'll want to keep subtitles on. Those are really the only gripes I have with the presentation. Everything else is great. For the gameplay, there are moments that do feel a bit like padding. If you're familiar with the original, you'll think, wow, this section is going on pretty long. There are some chapters where it feels natural, and some chapters where it feels like, okay, this is taking too long. Especially with certain boss fights, where they are just bullet sponges and they just keep taking hits. Like, you're wondering, when is this going to be over? And sometimes it's like multiple bosses in a row, so sometimes it gets kind of tedious. It makes it to where certain bosses are hard, not in a challenging way, but in a tedious way. And that's not fun. Now, my final gripe is about the story and characters, and it relates a lot to how the story was told in the original compared to this remake. I'm going to go ahead and say, without any spoilers, that the ending is probably going to disappoint people. It definitely did for me. I'm going to go in depth about why in a moment, but I just want to say that I'm very disappointed in that this has created another rift in the fanbase, yet again. There have been so many rifts in the Final Fantasy fanbase over the past few decades that you can't please every Final Fantasy fan. It's just impossible. And I thought that they would at least be able to please the Final Fantasy VII fans with this remake. But I guess not, because they completely changed the ending of the Midgar section, and that has fans divided. Some people like it, some people hate it, some people are cautiously optimistic, some people are just disappointed, like me. And that just really sucks. So now I'm going to go into why I don't like where this is going. So, spoilers ahead for both the original and the remake. I'll give you 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Alright, spoilers. So the biggest new addition to the remake is these things called Whispers, or the Arbiters of Fate. At first I thought they were something that Sephiroth had with the people in the black cloaks. That was sort of implied in the beginning. But apparently they're these things that make sure that the right fate is happening. And by the end of the game, there's this big epic battle with this giant Whisper and these other, like, smaller ones, and my biggest problem with the ending, because I was disappointed as I was playing it, because I was like, why did they need to make this big epic thing at the end when we know this is the first part? And it implies that this is more of a sequel/reboot type thing, and that the first game happened within this universe, and it just makes a lot of weird time travel, like, alternate universe, parallel dimension bullshit. It's very Kingdom Heartsy, and I like Kingdom Hearts. The thing is, I don't like it in this remake. And what bothers me so much about it is that I know a lot of people who wanted to play this because they don't like turn-based RPGs and they want to play the story of the original Final Fantasy, but with this new system and these new graphics. So they are not going to get the original story. But the remake also sort of assumes that you have played the original, because there are some moments where certain characters show up where you're like, who is that, if you have never played the original? Like, there's this dramatic scene where the Sector 7 plate falls, and you see Kate Sith, and he looks so weird, and he's just like, no. If you have never played the original, you're gonna be like, who the fuck is that? What happened? You're gonna get tonal whiplash if you have no idea who that is. And the ending of the game implies that they're going to be changing the way that all of this plays out. The thing is, I'm fine with them changing things. It's the way they're going about it that frustrates me. They didn't need to make this convoluted, time parallel bullshit. If you wanted to make changes to the original story, go ahead and do it, but don't make it this super convoluted thing. It's complicating an already complicated story. And that has me very worried for the next installments in this new franchise for Final Fantasy, I guess. And the biggest thing that frustrates me about it is that throughout the game, I was having a really great time. I was loving the way the characters were being fleshed out, but then the end happened and I was just so disappointed. Because despite the flaws with some of the presentation and the gameplay, I was still having a lot of fun with the story and characters, but then the end happened and man, I'm just so frustrated with it. Alright, rant over. That's the end of the spoiler section, I guess. So, the thing is, I have trouble recommending this to people because I know a lot of people wanted to play it because they didn't want to play an old RPG, but since there are so many changes to the story, especially the end, I'm not sure if I can recommend it. Because I think the way that the plot builds up in the original is much better, especially with Sephiroth, and with the mystery of who Cloud is, but a lot of the remake does rely on you knowing the original, so I have trouble recommending it to new people. If you are a fan of the original, you probably have it already. I'll just say, enjoy it while you can. The first 90 to 95% of the game is still really good. It's just the ending that disappoints me. So if you have played Final Fantasy VII Remake, tell me what you thought down in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Bye.